Welcome to Politicology. I'm Ron Steslow. And this is our weekly roundup, where we bring in a rotating panel of experts to discuss the truth you need to know behind the most important stories of the week and how they're shaping the political landscape. On today's all-star panel, making his roundup debut is Eric Cook. Eric is the founder of Downfield, a boutique communications firm and former communications director for New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito. Thanks for joining us, Eric. Returning to the roundup is Politicology favorite, crisis communications consultant, and MSNBC political analyst, our good friend Susan Del Percio. Good to see you, Susan. On this week's roundup, the Facebook whistleblower's 60 Minutes interview and testimony before Congress, Donald Trump begging a federal court to make Twitter let him back on the platform, and a new Make America Great Again PAC that Trump launched late last week, how Taylor Swift, yes, Taylor Swift, is getting swept into the Virginia gubernatorial race. And finally, in our segment for Politicology Plus subscribers, we'll talk about the controversial video that came out last Sunday showing activists in Arizona confronting Senator Sinema in a bathroom. If you're not already subscribed, you can head over to politicology.com/plus to get the Plus segment and join our community. Let's dig in. It's been another bad week for Facebook. On Sunday, CBS 60 Minutes revealed that the Facebook whistleblower who has filed complaints with federal law enforcement is Frances Haugen. Haugen is a data scientist with a degree in computer engineering and a master's degree in business from Harvard. She's spent 15 years working in social media companies, including Google and Pinterest. And when Haugen quit Facebook in May, she took a trove of internal Facebook research with her. And in that interview, she said she came forward because Facebook is aware of how its platforms are used to spread hate and misinformation, and that it has tried to stop that from coming to light. She echoed that in her prepared testimony before the Senate Subcommittee on Consumer Protection, Product Safety, and Data Security. She said, quote, "I came forward because I recognized a frightening truth. Almost no one outside of Facebook knows what happens inside Facebook." And in both the 60 Minutes interview and her testimony in Congress, Haugen focused on Facebook's use of engagement-based ranking, which is using algorithms to prioritize content that generates strong reactions, and the focus on meaningful social interactions, which prioritized posts from friends and family over brands and publishers. One of the documents Haugen took was a report that flagged concerns by major political parties across Europe, and the report says that the parties feel strongly that the change to the algorithm has forced them to skew negative in their communications on Facebook, and that their attempts to gain more traction on Facebook have led them to more extreme policy positions. So before we dive into this, I just want to get your reactions to the 60 Minutes interview with Haugen and her testimony. Was there anything in particular that stuck out to you? Because as longtime observers of Facebook and the ill that they seem to create in the world, a lot of this felt like, well, we knew that. And there wasn't a lot of news here, but she did confirm a lot of things with documented evidence that we had never seen before. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, to me, it's no secret that negativity drives engagement online, right? We only have to look at basically everywhere.
Yeah.
But what it did do, as you said, was it reinforced it reinforced that. When I was watching, I found someone who was very credible, who had documented evidence, who had meticulously gone through it, and was making in sort of very clear language just how negativity is driven on Facebook, and how there are certain things, algorithms, policies, things that Facebook can apparently turn off and turn on. That to me was sort of the biggest takeaway, that there was almost this switch that Facebook could say, okay, well, we're gonna dial the fire hose back a little bit, but just for this couple months, and then after that, we're gonna turn it back on, and good luck, everyone. We'll see what happens.
Like they actually had internal controls, dials that they had created specifically to tone down the heat.
Exactly.
And yeah, Susan, how did you read this?
Well, first, I'd like to say the fact that you had to say another bad week for
another
Facebook,
bad week for Facebook.
like that another is what's important here. Because is this something that turns the tide? Because it keeps surviving bad weeks.
Yeah.
And as far as the interview goes, besides bringing the receipts, I think that the other issue that made it touch kind of all of America is, yes, we knew about the political stuff, but the influence on girls and the negativity out there, the body shaming, the anorexia, like what it does to harm girls, and she also had the receipts on that, to me is a turning point. And that really, I think, is something that everyone could connect with and say, wait, I know I didn't like my kids being on Facebook or Instagram, and social media is a problem, but oh my gosh, like this is really a problem, and it's not just politics or people being mean. This is something that they're encouraging, that shocking behavior, the more outrage, the more likes, and that I think hits home. That made a big difference. So you have basically, the political side, which I think everyone is constantly looking at, and I think the fact that it was brought over from overseas really shows the interest in protecting democracy, maybe there more so than here these days. But then again, making it into something that almost every household in America can relate to.
Totally.
And the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues also, is Facebook has a declining user base. There's fewer people using it. People are spending less time on it. Is this going to be another sort of kick to people say, you know what, maybe I don't need my, I think I only use my Facebook account to check to see whose birthday it is at this point. I don't think I've posted, but then there's Instagram, which is also part of Facebook, WhatsApp, which is obviously, it's big in the United States. It's massive overseas, another huge driver of misinformation.
Yeah.
So it's this sort of declining user base. An aging, as a millennial, it kind of hurts me to say that, but as an aging user base.
I'm with you.
And fewer people are using it. And I think there's a pretty good chance that people are going to look at this and say, you know what, I don't need this.
But it seems to also morph into a changing tool. So Arab Spring, it was critical, right? When you go back, how information was being shared and what was happening. And then it seems like people figured out how to use it and then potentially abuse it. So if there is a potential good, there has to be some way of metering it, because also most people, I can't believe it, get their news from Facebook. Yeah. So you can't turn that switch off overnight. Like there is still going to be a lot of information out there. Yeah. And conspiracy theories don't have to be big and shocking. Mm-hmm. They can go deep and just slowly ooze into that environment. So I think that while they may have a declining user base, I think that there will always be someone looking to use it for something different, and now probably only for the bad, not for the good.
And it was the United States and Canada that have seen, I think, the biggest drops. And the flip side to the Arab Spring, where Facebook was used to organize and get people connected, is what happened in Myanmar a few years ago, where Facebook was used to perpetuate killings and genocide. And it's remarkable, the sort of arc that this has taken over the last. See what your high school friends are up to, and then, what's going on in Myanmar now, how the tool has sort of shifted over the last 15 years or so.
Yeah. And I wonder, we talked about this last week. We talked about this terrific piece by Adrienne LaFrance about, the biggest autocracy in the world is how she framed Facebook and thinking about them as a foreign power, which was a big discussion. And I wonder, to both of your points, it's very difficult to yes, their user base is declining, but the amount of data that they have that they get from tracking you everywhere across all of the internet, regardless of whether you're on their platforms, it is just enormous. It's difficult to think about the marketing landscape of the world without Facebook. And for better or worse, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but given all of the remedies that have been bandied about, whether it's antitrust breakups or some kind of content regulation, is there anything that either of you see as the most viable path forward to decreasing the harm Facebook seems to be doing, in particular in our sort of inability to have a shared fact base, which is a necessity for having the foundation of healthy discourse in this country, which we don't have, right?
We don't.
So is there anything, like, what comes to mind when you think, okay, well, that's a potential option? Like, most of these things are never going to happen, but what are some constructive paths forward? So here's
the worst news to come out of this whole thing.
Okay.
Someone else said it during the week. The ball is in Congress's court to regulate.
As usual.
Okay, let me say that again. It's now up to Congress to create the regulation. So we have all the information, we have the whistleblower, and Congress can't even pay our debt. Like, they're going to come up with really good regulation? I don't think so. I mean, there are motivating factors, but that in essence is the problem. There are ways to get there if there is good intent on both sides or any side to do it. But that's where it's limited. The collective us, like we can't do anything. There's no movement to start. There's no pressure points to start. It is on Congress.
Okay, but let me suggest something to you to react to. It is on Congress, but it isn't not. Yes, it's not happening for lack of political will, although that seems to be changing now. Bipartisan agreement that this is bad and we should do something about it. But the doing something about it requires understanding what the hell it is that Facebook does, and they don't.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
That is, yeah, and I think the hearing the other day, Senator Blumenthal, we need to shut down Insta or whatever.
Insta.
It does require not just a basic understanding of this. It requires a very detailed understanding of what Facebook is,
what an algorithm is,
how it operates. Time and again, Mark Zuckerberg's gone before the Senate and the House, and the hearings have been kind of duds.
Mm-hmm.
He speaks a language that they don't understand. They speak a language that maybe he doesn't understand. And
doesn't care to,
and the public is probably is worse off for it. You talk about regulations too, and it also becomes kind of tricky because how do you regulate Facebook, and then does that mean you have to go and regulate Google? How do this sort of how does the ecosystems all interact with each other? Is it through the FTC? Is it right? So there's all sorts of legal and legislative things that make this exceptionally tricky, which is probably to Facebook's advantage because once people start hearing, FTC, FCC, Senate, House, it just kind of becomes this this thing that it's an alphabet soup.
It's a cacophony of acronyms that we don't really understand.
But the idea that they can't, I get that. And you've heard me say that before. And actually I was schooled on, I forget what subject, can Congress can actually understand the problems at hand? And someone took me aside and was like, you know what? They can. Because look at the banking industry, for example. And look at the regulation we do on our tax code. Basically, there are bankers and firms inside, private firms inside our government basically saying how regulations need to work. We do it in the airline industry. We do it in multiple areas. There is no reason why Congress cannot hire people and bring them in and break this down. I don't expect my Congress member to know how to figure out how the algorithms and how Facebook works. I'm okay with that as long as they're bringing in the experts. And that's where the will has to come, is that they have to be willing to get serious and say, if we want to have a functioning society, the same way we want banking to be regulated and airplanes to be regulated, the Defense Department to have outside input on weaponry, etc. We can do this.
Yeah.
It's just that we have to almost stop saying, Congress is going to fix it. I said that in the beginning, but they really need the will to do it. And it is possible. And I do think the only thing that will motivate them is not the politics of it, but really the crying out from parents around the country, because that is what's going to happen. Every time we see a death and we hear about something that had to do with being on online bullying is an example, the pushing into eating disorders is huge, and pushing depression, other issues that to me is the modem that gets, or the mode rather, that gets us into the space that elected officials will get the experts in and pay attention and digest this.
Yeah. Okay.
One of Facebook's biggest challenges also is that it's hard for them to, and this is why I think we're moving towards the pathway of regulation, is that it's hard for them to generate positive news anymore. Facebook is a political tool, right? It's a tool used by political advertisers. It's a tool used by political actors. It's a place where tons of people get lots of news. But where is Facebook creating positive news stories from, right? They've got some, they throw money around, they give money to some local news organizations, but it's not like these are like sustained positive engagements that are happening over and over and over again. And you just have this torrent of negative news. And look, there's one whistleblower, for every one of this person.
Yep.
There's probably more coming now, right? This is someone who took thousands of documents. And Facebook's pushback on her was, well, she's not an expert in this. She doesn't work in this area.
Yeah.
You want to bet that an engineer who does work in this area is going to think, well,
Yep.
I actually do.
I do know exactly what I'm talking about.
And I do know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And you can tell that there's this, and we see it on, in the forums and the Facebook forums that get leaked all the time now. People are angry.
Yeah.
People who work there are angry. They don't want, they've probably gone into this job thinking that they were gonna with sort of idealistic aspirations of what Facebook can be and how it can connect people and all these other things. And they see what's going on, and there's clearly this like cultural that's built up there that's saying, "Hey, wait a second, this isn't what we want to do." I expect to see even more of it. I expect we'll see even more of it from different divisions and different places of people who are coming forward and saying, "You know what, this isn't how it's supposed to be."
From a communications perspective, that point is really important. The constant drumbeat, the lack of positive stories. The sort of consistent drip of negative stories, which Mike Madrid mentioned a few weeks ago, as he described it as like the refrigerator hum, right? It will build over time, and that you can't underestimate the effect that sustained narrative is going to have. So, yeah, I think I agree.
I think it's baked in at this point.
Yeah.
I think that there is a huge segment of the population that looks at Facebook and says, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And then there's another huge segment of the population, obviously, that maybe the news doesn't penetrate to them. They, still get most of their news from there.
Yeah.
But it's not going to get smaller.
Yeah.
Which also brings up, like, so if you're going to try and break up Facebook as it looks like a monopoly, like they buy, if they're not going to do it, they're going to buy someone who's coming up with the new next. And we are about due for the new next. I mean, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have Instagram.
Well, Facebook doesn't have a TikTok competitor, really, unless you count Instagram Reels.
But and the question is that next thing being bought up by Facebook, or can regulation perhaps prevent that to allow the next thing to kind of emerge and flourish, whatever that may be, and it will, no matter what.
Yeah.
But I do think between the declining use and the drip, to Eric's point, maybe it's also the fear of the next is out there.
Yeah.
We just don't know what it is.
And there's also this sort of hovering issue of online privacy. And, to the point you made about, Facebook, marketers, and it's sort of following you everywhere you go. Europe has pretty strong, you have to opt in, anyone
GDPR.
who goes online, right? You see it, like you have to click 16 different boxes.
And they're really annoying.
And every time you relog into a hotel Wi-Fi, you have to click them again.
Yeah.
Right. But it follows you everywhere you go. It's across the ecosystem. Facebook has to, buy into it. All the other, all the providers have to, not just the services, but the providers have to, to buy into it. We don't have that here.
Yeah.
It's something that actually Facebook, has advocated for, because they want, if something happens to them, they want to make sure it happens to Twitter. They want to make sure it happens to Google.
Yeah,
they want to
it's
make sure
good for their business model.
It's good for the business model. But it hasn't, while people individually will tell you to a person that they value their privacy, it's not an issue that's sort of blown up across the political spectrum in a right. If you poll people, online privacy is not something that's going to be high. However, if you ask them, is it important? They'll say it's very important.
Yeah.
So I think that, to Susan's point on building sort of like this wave to actually get, to create regulations is, online privacy and the way we interact with the internet is probably going to have to become more of an actual, top issue for people.
I think it's only going to over time. I mean, it like if we take this conversation, just zoom way out and look at the sort of, just humanity as a whole and the tools that we have just like invented to connect ourselves with that are completely unprecedented in our history. And now we're trying to cope with the ramifications of stuff that we don't really know how to deal with, right? And
it moved so far.
Yeah.
I mean, we walked on the moon, 1969, and now all of a sudden, like, you have with the power of a graphing calculator.
Yeah.
Right now, the iPhone I've got in front of me has millions of times more capability than that, and it since it moves so far so fast.
Yeah.
The culture and the government and the regulations haven't been able to just have, the Title II, that the internet providers argue over is a 1930s era telephone regulation, right? Where they were like, where they're like, telephones is a utility,
a public
good,
good, right?
Right, and that's literally from the 1930s when people were like, well, if we want to connect these farms in Oklahoma to Oklahoma City, someone's got to do it.
Someone's got to do it. Yeah. I think we're only going to see more and more. I mean, as we go forward, it is inevitable that more people will become smarter about this and have more robust debates about it in public. We're just at the beginning of this, I think. Speaking of social media, in a court filing late last Friday, Donald Trump asked a federal district court judge for a preliminary injunction that would require Twitter to allow him back on the site while his lawsuit against the social media platform plays out. There is a good explanation of this suit in an MSNBC opinion piece by Jessica Levinson, who's a professor at Loyola Law School. Trump argued that Twitter was censoring him by imposing the ban and that Twitter had been coerced by Trump's political rivals in Congress. Sorry, I'm chuckling because we've heard this one before. Trump and his attorneys have argued that because Twitter has a big impact on public discourse, it benefits from a federal law, Section 230, and that it allegedly worked with government officials, the aforementioned rivals in Congress, that it is the government. Levinson described the legal arguments as, wait for it, real stinkers. This case has...
That's the legalese I understand.
That's the legalese. We love it. So this case has almost no chance of getting Trump back on Twitter because if a judge did force a private company to allow Trump on the platform, that would be an actual violation of the First Amendment. Not theirs. Losing won't be anything new for Trump. Obviously, in his attempts to subvert the election, he lost 61 of the 62 election lawsuits his team filed. But I want to dive into the reasons why Trump is asking the court to get him back on Twitter, because actually this has nothing to do with a good faith legal argument. I think this has nothing to do with the First Amendment, but it does have everything to do with politics and power. So Axios published an article on Wednesday showing Trump's post-office online engagement hitting new lows. Clicks to Trump content have gone from January 20th, 4 million a day, 4 million clicks a day, down to 100,000 or so per day, which is where we are now as of October 2nd or something. That's a drop in 37% in August and September compared to the 2 months prior. And there were 26% fewer news articles about Trump in the last 2 months. So he's just tanking. Nobody's talking about him. And to a sociopath, to a narcissistic sociopath, that is the worst possible thing that can happen. So now that we've had about 8 months without Trump on Twitter, how has his absence?
That all it's been?
I know.
Wow.
It doesn't, not at all long enough. How has this impacted just Twitter writ large and just our political conversation? I
mean, Twitter, you still see reporters and others, post his
press
bizarre
releases.
statements, and he tried to create a blog and tried to say it was something else, which was very funny. There is a bit of he is sort of lying in the tall grass, though, right?
Yeah.
As much as it's easy to enjoy him not really having a megaphone. He still has an iron grip on the Republican Party. He doesn't, while Twitter has always been a good tool of his and was his tool, and quite frankly, it was something that he was good at.
88 million followers.
Yeah, I mean, he used it in a way that was effective. But Nikki Haley the other day said that she doesn't picture a Republican Party without Donald Trump, or doesn't want to.
Yeah.
So while he's not maybe reaching folks like us with any sort of regularity, Clearly the apparatus still exists. He's got the new super PAC.
Make America Great Again, again. Which we're going to talk about the origin of that in a minute, but
the new super PAC. But he clearly has this iron grip on the Republican Party, and that's not going away whether he's on Twitter or not.
Yeah. Susan, what's your read?
Well, it was funny because Donald Trump said right before the lawsuit that he really likes this new method of getting his message out. It's very eloquent. Elegant rather. He said, it's a very elegant way of delivering my message. Pen and paper. But that's right about Donald Trump's speed. But that is one of the issues that has come up over and over is, when will Donald Trump announce he's running for president? Whether or not he actually ends up doing it. Yeah. Now, if he does announce it and make himself a candidate, Twitter will be in a position that they're going to have to put him back on because being a candidate for elective office, now we're getting into a whole different set of rules on Twitter.
That's right.
So he may be, I think that's one of the reasons why he keeps raising it, because he wants to use that as a reason that they should allow him on. Of course, there's a lot of downside for him and what he can and cannot do if he becomes a candidate politically.
Yeah, he does not want to be a candidate until the last minute possible.
That's where I think he's just kind of balancing and throwing this out with the lawsuit and things like that. But he's not losing his grip on the party, that's for sure. I mean, that's without question, because there's only some place that his message will be amplified. Yeah. But I mean Donald Trump not on Twitter. Okay, good. That's good. And like Eric said, he's still in the high, he's laying down there.
Lying in the tall grass. That is such a great analogy, because we talked about the rally in Alabama at length. Speaking of tall grass, it was in a field in the middle of nowhere between Huntsville and Birmingham. 30,000 people showed up in that field.
Yeah. Without masks.
Of course. Yeah. And if anyone bothered to watch the entire thing, I noted at the time multiple times, these rallies have taken a complete turn for the worst from what they used to be. So he's not going anywhere. He doesn't want to announce for president because of a host of federal disclosure requirements that would trigger. He doesn't want to have to do any of that yet. But I think it's pretty obvious that this is a ploy to raise money. I mean, ultimately, this is like legal defense. Like, they're censoring me, raise money. This is a fundraising tool. Well, that's what this comes down to.
Also,
it's file a lawsuit so we can, you have to defend me and my, they're going to raise oodles of money on this.
I don't know. But what I do know is that the fundraising pays for these types of lawsuits.
Well, yeah, totally.
So I think I think the Twitter thing is somewhat of a fundraising tool, but I think he's only doing these lawsuits now, and he will at least be able to pay. Attorneys know they can get paid because there's enough money in the fund. Seriously, about who will file it. And I wouldn't be surprised to see more suits going forward from him, because he now has the resources. Yeah. Because guess what? He's off the Forbes 400 wealthiest people list.
That's right.
He took a drop, and so I'm sure he has to make noise over that somehow. Yeah. But he now can actually fund some of the things he wants to do, which is actually really frightening in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's also very much sort of like the cycle of Trump grift, right? Get kicked off Twitter, complain about it, raise some money complaining about it, to file a lawsuit to complain about it, use the lawsuit to raise money about being kicked off Twitter. It's this sort of
it's a grievance cycle.
Yeah, it's an endless sort of grievance cycle, and his people love it. His base loves it. Yep. It's what he used to catapult himself into political relevancy, about a decade ago now. Yep. It's a tried and true tactic. He's going to keep doing it.
Okay, so speaking of Trump, last week, a Trump donor, Trishelle Odom, I think I'm saying that right, accused former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski of sexual misconduct. A Trump spokesman said last week that Lewandowski will no longer be associated with Trump World. Trump, capital T, capital W, Trump World. Sorry, you can't make that up. And indicate, that's one of the things, sorry, just as a side note, that I will never miss. Just the random title casing of irrelevant words in a sentence. Just anyway, the spokesman indicated Lewandowski would be out of the super PAC Make America Great Again action, But that's proven difficult for Trump to do since Lewandowski is one of only 2 board members for the PAC. And that is why Trump's team launched a new PAC called Make America Great Again, Again.
Yeah, of course they did.
Like, wait, remember the Stephen Colbert, something for a better tomorrow, right? You can't make up how farcical it is. So in the press statement announcing the new PAC, it was declared the only Trump-approved super PAC. Yes, so gold-plated indeed. Beyond the hilarity of the new name, what does it mean that Trump's team hasn't been able to force Lewandowski out of Make America Great Again action? And is there anything useful to say about this?
So here's the thing.
Yeah.
We can see once again that the Trump team is always sloppy.
Mm-hmm.
They don't realize what they're getting into. How do you only have 2 people and trust Corey Lewandowski, who you already fired before? You make him one of 2
How many
board
times
members.
has he been fired? I mean,
and that just goes to show you, just because he's out of Trump world now doesn't mean he won't be back in.
Oh, yeah.
What I find not interesting, but it's just so typical Trump world, capital T, capital W, is that it wasn't the offense of basically groping a woman. It was groping a donor.
Mm-hmm.
So that interfered with Trump's money.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he didn't like. He could care less what
he doesn't care
Corey's
about the
going.
salt.
Yeah, he doesn't care what that, well, we know he keeps hiring the same people who commit those kind of crimes. So that's just par for the course when it comes to Trump. But it's just so disturbing and yet so typical that it was sloppy. Yeah. And that you just know Corey's coming back.
In other words, par for the Doral cores, whatever. Yeah.
These folks never actually leave the orbit.
Yeah.
Like, as you said, the same people keep coming back over and over again. In terms of the super PAC, I'm actually very curious to see how they actually use it. Trump is obviously notoriously very stingy with his money. With his money, with other people's money, sure, he'll spend it. But with money that they take in. So what are they actually going to be doing? Are they going to actually be supporting candidates? Are they going to be running ads? Are they going to be using it for rallies? Are they going to be using, what exactly?
Well, they've been doing that with that PAC. That's what they've been doing all along. Now they just had to rejigger the resources.
Yeah, but there's still money in it, right? Like there's still money in the PAC.
No, they
drained it.
Yeah, I think they drained
it.
Because there's also, let's not forget, Corey knows, and I forget who the other board member is, but they can't take that money because Eric's right. Trump looks at that as his money. He raised it. It's his. And they do not want to go, have Trump that angry at them. No one, frankly, does in that orbit. So they're not going to keep his money. That is, going too far. I think the problem is that they just couldn't dissolve it fast enough. Yeah. Which was the problem because they don't want to stop raising money. So they had to make the switch. Yeah. In order to continue raising money. Yeah. So we'll see.
And super PACs are interesting in that regard, right? You have to create a board. Yeah. In this case, they created a 2-person board, which is
really unusual.
Which is really unusual.
Yeah. Is it Pam Bondi?
Yeah.
Pam Bondi
right,
is the other board member, by the way.
Yeah. So it creates it creates this funny situation where you could have a 1-to-1 split. Yeah. It's not like the Trump orbit, is ethical or whatever, but it's just like a bizarre 2-person board.
Why would you do that?
Most of them are a little bit bigger. They're odd numbered, so you never have a split vote. So you don't have to, you don't have the situation where you can, you have to literally basically dissolve a super PAC and create another one, or drain a super PAC and keep it alive. It's a very weird situation. Can we just say one thing,
just only because, like, for some of your listeners, is like, just remember, a super PAC is a PAC. It's just a regular.
It's a PAC with a cover letter, folks.
We call it super, but it's really. And like any other PAC, we say it when it raises a lot of money.
Well, what we should say is it has a distinction in that it is disconnected, right? It is disconnected. Right. That's a term that means something in legal jargon for the FEC's purposes. It just means that it's completely independent, right? And that's what makes
and
it a
it's
super PAC.
Like, it's not categorized.
Sure.
Like, when you go look them up, like, they don't say, okay, PACs and
Yep.
then, like, separate categories,
Yep.
super PACs.
Right. Yeah, no.
And I think that's where, like, this Corey Lewandowski, Pam Bondi's thing is going, is it's just going to be an empty shell of a PAC.
Yeah.
And that's
And
it.
That's it.
It's like it's another Trump venture that's sort of fallen on its face, and it's going to go on in a zombie form for a couple years.
And I guarantee you the lawyers or the accountants who are overseeing it will get stiffed.
Yeah, 100%. There's no way they
will not get paid.
No way they get paid.
Okay, this next segment might be one of my favorite that we've ever done. It's completely bonkers, but it's one of my favorite that we might have ever done. So just weeks before Election Day in Virginia, Democratic candidate Terry McAuliffe has started targeting Taylor Swift fans online with digital advertising. So according to 538's average, McAuliffe has a 2.5-point lead over Republican candidate Glenn Youngkin. But a poll released by Emerson on Wednesday has the race at a tie. On Tuesday, the McAuliffe campaign launched a series of Facebook, Instagram, and Google search ads targeting Youngkin for the role he played in purchasing Taylor Swift's master recordings in 2019. For the non-Swifties listening, in 2019, the private equity group, the Carlyle Group, where Youngkin was the CEO, worked with Scooter Braun, who is a media executive and quite controversial these days, to acquire Big Machine Label Group, which is the record label where Taylor Swift began her career. And in the acquisition, they took control of all of her master recordings and refused to sell them back to her. Taylor Swift actually called on the Carlyle Group to intervene in the deal, and the purchase sparked a major controversy, which is now years long, between Swift and Braun. Many fans across social media came to Swift's defense using the hashtag #WeStandWithTaylor. And if you've ever encountered these fans on social media, you know that they are an interesting variety. So the McAuliffe campaign, and they're very, very passionate. The McAuliffe campaign is targeting voters who like and engage with Swift's content on Facebook and Instagram, and people in Virginia who search for Taylor Swift's name on Google. And all of this is according to The Verge. So the reason I want to talk about this is because it's very creative, and it's very creative. I have no idea if it's going to work.
It's very creative, but I really hope Terry McAuliffe has something else.
I mean, I hope, yeah, sure.
That's not going to get him where he needs to go.
I don't know. Have you ever encountered these Taylor Swift fans?
We have seen her involved in politics before.
Yes.
And it has influence.
In 48 hours, she told people to go register to vote, and more than 169,000 new people had registered to vote. And most of them were in the 18 to 29 age range. It's crazy.
I think the value is in the story and that people like us are talking about it.
Sure,
but
maybe.
I like I said, I really hope he has something else.
Yeah, okay. So do you think this is going to work at all? I have no idea how many Swifties are in Virginia, but...
I mean, it got a bunch of press.
Yeah.
We're talking about it.
We are.
I have some friends down there working on the race, and people noticed, right? People noticed, and it's something that's a sort of different creative attack. It actually goes to some of the stuff that, it brings up some of his issues with the Carlyle Group, which is a huge conglomerate, and he's sort of running as an everyman, when in fact he was basically a private equity CEO. Yep. So it does have a sort of roundabout way of getting back to McAuliffe's overall message on him, that he's private equity, that it's predatory, and that's this and that. And look what they did to one of the biggest recording artists in the entire world. And if they can do that to Taylor Swift, what does that do to the voters of Virginia?
Totally. I think it's a very creative way of getting at issues that actually damage him, almost by proxy. It's a way of sneaking in and letting the people who consume this messaging draw their own connections to that problematic profile. I think that's actually pretty powerful.
And it's even we're 4 weeks out from the election. It's still without paid media, it's still hard to penetrate, to actually reach people. It's a story that's actually reached a lot of people, and it's been in a bunch of the local papers in Virginia. It's been on local TV in Virginia. It was a very creative and good way to actually to talk to voters.
Listen, I don't fault it. It's fine. You want to spend $50,000 on something like that? That's fine, and it's a good hit in itself. But when we see that voter enthusiasm is so down,
Yeah.
I actually think these kind of stunts can also hurt who he needs to come out.
Say more. Why?
Because it's not serious. And people right now want to know, like suburban women want to know why they should come to the polls right now. They don't care about what's happening with Swift. Like, I just think that that's where the message needs to be sent. This has to, and it has to be consistent. McAuliffe's doing a good job trying to thread that needle between being anti-Washington and anti-Trump and pro-Democrat policies. It's a very tricky walk. And I rather see him, because I, as a Republican right now, prefer to see him win, because I think it's just better, responsible governing, frankly. I think that he has to stay on that serious message and really not let. I get that this is cute and everything, but I think with 4 weeks to go, you keep hammering. You want to do something underground, trying to get the youth vote out. That's fine. Yeah, but they're really probably not coming out if turnout's already looks like it's decreasing.
It's low. Yeah.
So
okay. So that's fair. The question is whether or not at this stage in the campaign it's a turnout game, or if this is actually going to, if a decrease in his favorables is actually going to, change the ballot at all.
The other day, Trump, injected himself into the race. Is a big help. Injected himself again to the race. A big help for big help for Terry McAuliffe, who's been running against him. And Susan made the great point of balancing the sort of DC insider versus outsider, running with the Democratic Party versus running against what he sort of said about how the bills have come together in Washington. It's not the easiest environment for him to run in, which is why I like the Swift stunt a lot, because it is something that is different, and it's a different take on the attack on him, as I said, and it just has people talking about something that's not the bipartisan infrastructure package and all this other stuff that's sort of been dominating the debate. In a way that maybe hasn't been very helpful.
I will say my millennial friends.
Yeah, are they talking about it also?
No, meaning the two of you. Take it from the middle-aged woman,
aging millennial friends.
That it's great that it's buzzing there.
Yeah,
it's not buzzing
for you.
for in my world. Like it's
guess what?
And
this cohort is the one that actually needs help turning out and paying attention. So.
Well, listen, I'm happy when I see more people participating.
Yeah.
I'm all for getting as many people to the polls. You know this. I don't care if you're D or I.
Yeah.
Vote. Voting is the way our democracy functions. But again, and Virginia's also tricky, by the way, because of its positioning so close to DC. It almost feels like it's part.
Totally feels like it's part of DC.
Well,
Northern Virginia anyway. I mean,
but there is a sense of it does kind of get incorporated a little bit. And you're right, Northern Virginia. But and even Eric, you said it. You said it's a stunt. Like that's the stuff. Like
it's a great stunt, though.
It maybe, but is it?
Okay, well, let me tell you why.
But also, I'm not going to knock the stunt, okay? But I'm just saying it's a stunt.
Sure.
I think it's a great stunt in that way. But I still think it's a stunt. And I think that that's where Republicans kind of gear up. We see that. And we're like, oh, let's just go hit on everything else. He wants to talk about Taylor Swift. We'll hit him on this, and that.
Yeah.
Because that creates the opportunity to move that conversation from stunt-like and targeted audience to a bigger audience. So politically, I just don't wonder if that doesn't potentially take conversation from other places and reinforce
and in all seriousness, though, this is part of a multi-million-dollar persuasion budget.
Yeah, right. So it's one piece that we're talking about.
It is a piece of a much bigger picture that's happening.
Okay, so I have one other thought on this, which I think is in the "this is a cool idea" category, which is it isn't, to me, it's sort of a novel way of bringing in culture to the political fight, which we all know that most of our political fights now are all just proxy fights for culture war, right? That's what they are, and this just feels like a really effective way of getting people engaged in the political process who don't really care about it, but really care about culture a lot. And in particular, a younger cohort who needs help needs coaxing, needs cajoling to get involved, to get out and actually vote. So contrast this.
Just then have her do an ad. Just have her do an ad. Vote for Terry McAuliffe. This thing.
I mean, Taylor doesn't have to do anything.
No, but I'm just saying, if that was the ad, that would do what you want.
But
doing it through this.
Well, here's my question. Contrast this to other ways that celebrities have traditionally gotten involved in politics, because it tends to not work very well when they themselves get it, right? So
well, she to be clear, she's not involved.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like
there's where the sway comes from is when she says go out and vote, and over 100,000 people in 2 days do that. That is the sway that you were talking about, the influence. And since she's not part of the campaign, it is a little. You have to go from 1 to 2 to get to 3. And that does not tend to typically motivate younger people. They are motivated, in fact, by celebrities. Mm-hmm. We do know that, not at the numbers that many hope, but that is a good motivator. Yeah. So if Taylor Swift wants to go out there, do an ad for Terry McAuliffe, that's fantastic. And I would give that a lot different weight than I do this ad campaign. Do
you see any parallels between this stunt and Republicans creating a lot of hay out of canceling Dr. Seuss? Is there anything similar here?
That was a sort of flash in the pan 2-day. Was it McCarthy read it read
Wasn't
Dr.
Ted? Was it
one of them read like a Dr. Seuss book on a video or something. Yeah. No, I mean that was a one-off thing, and it was
about the owners of the family members not wanting to publish certain books because they were deemed to now be
totally spun upside down.
Yeah, it was spun completely upside down, but their choice, and then. That's when the Republicans came in and said, "Oh, you're canceling Dr. Seuss and blah blah blah."
Yeah.
It is almost the same. I'll equate it in this way: they were both stunts that didn't really affect people.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on the Taylor Swift thing, because I think it is going to have an impact, and I'm just interested. First of all, kudos to the McAuliffe team, because it's very creative, I think, and let's keep an eye on it.
And the Virginia Democratic Party.
For sure.
Virginia Democratic Party has been doing a great job at defining their opponent.
Yes.
They've been doing an excellent job. They have been dogging that man for months now. And they've just been doing a great job. Rapid response, research, everything. They've done a great job of defining it.
And to that point, you see, when we talk about kind of the inside politics game, that's exactly what the state party is supposed to do.
That's what they're supposed to do.
That's exactly. They are doing it so Terry can run his campaign and stay on his message, and the state, you just don't see it. Like, as someone who kind of grew up in local politics, like, I love seeing the state party work for the candidate. It shows that it may help them in a lot of their down ballot races too. So
and it's going to help. It'll help them next year when there's when Virginia gets redistricted. There's going to be a bunch of House seats that are going to be pretty competitive. Having a strong state party in a state like Virginia, which has obviously gone more blue over the last 15 years or so. It's going to be very important. What could be a tough year.
Yep. Okay, now that we are up to speed on a few of the biggest stories this week, let's talk about what you're watching, Susan.
Vaccine mandates.
Okay.
So we know that New York City public schools, there was a lawsuit this week. It was denied that all public school workers have to get vaccinated, mandated vaccines. 95%. That practice has been there. There was warnings, but de Blasio put in about a month ago that it was the case. 95% of public school workers are vaccinated. Here is the next challenge. And Bill de Blasio is looking at this as vaccination of public safety workers, police, fire, correction workers. Now, here are some numbers. And the city, by the way, New York City, 83% of its adult residents haven't had at least one shot. 83%.
Wow.
Police department, 68%. Fire department, 59%. And correction officers who, remember, we're saying we need to get it first. We're in this environment and it's raging. They are at 49%. So I think that this is, when we start seeing this, and it's not going to mean much to a lot of your listeners, but in New York, there's a Dorman lobby, which is very influential. It's called 32BJ. They just said that basically buildings can have their employees mandate vaccinations, which was huge in a labor negotiation.
Yeah.
And that's also why the unions of police, fire, corrections getting into this fight and probably losing based on what we've seen will set the stage for California, for other states. Now, the governors and mayors may not want to do it in other states, but the fact that it can be mandated and generally pushed into acceptance is critical for us coming out of this.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am curious if you happen to know what the vaccination rates are among inmates, if corrections officers' vaccination rates are so low, and how does
I
do you have any idea how that works?
do not know. I do know though, during the height of the crisis in New York, they were one of the most populated. That population was very high in having the virus.
Yeah.
So at some point, either they have the shots. There could also be herd immunity there. I don't know if it's if anyone's looking to require that the inmates have it. That's a very, very interesting question.
Yeah.
That I would definitely look at.
Yeah, I'm gonna look that up. That's really great. Look ahead. What do you got, Eric?
So in this week and in the coming weeks, we're going to start getting more and more congressional maps of legislative districts, local plus the congressional maps. It's going to set the stage for the midterms next year. And it's, quite frankly, depending on how the various gerrymanders go, is going to determine whether or not Democrats can even have a chance at keeping the House. Texas put out their maps. Ohio's putting out their maps soon. Oregon just finished theirs. New York tried to, but we kind of failed, and now we're gonna have new maps in January. It is a huge deal.
Yep.
And it's very hard to underestimate just how important this is, and what these districts are going to look like. Every state is doing it, basically however they want to, whether it's an independent commission, whether it's controlled by Republicans, controlled by Democrats. And it's basically going to determine, up front, the feasibility of holding together the Democratic majority.
Yeah. Is there any in particular state that you're watching closely? I mean, it's obviously like we should be watching the entire map, but is there
New York is a big one. New York has since we there was a independent commission that came out a couple weeks ago. The maps were like garbage. They're not going to be taken. The legislature is going to do them. I think they're doing January. It's a state where we're losing, I think, 1 or 2 seats. I forget what exactly it is.
I think it's
what's interesting. They're losing the one, and the one will be probably Tom Reed in upstate New York. But what's interesting in New York, and this is where you have to keep in mind, redistricting is not all bad news for the Democrats, is those lines for the remaining congressional seats, we have a bunch of Republicans that those lines tweak just a little bit. They can't hold on their seats.
Yeah.
It looks like in New York alone, even with losing a seat, they still may be a net win of about 5 seats for the Democrats.
Yeah, Democrats might pick up seats because of that.
The way they're now, by the way, and that's because of gerrymandering, and the state legislature is able to do that. So we went from independent commission, right, which we like. We love independent.
But I don't. That's a different story.
That's a different story, but it sounds good. To clearly partisan Democrat-only input on the maps.
Yeah.
I mean, New York and California are the big states. I think I forget the exact number, but the percentage of House Democrats that come from California and come from New York is a fairly significant number. So depending on what the lines look like in both those states, that's how Democrats could potentially keep a bulwark
up the margin.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I should clarify, I do have strong feelings about independent redistricting commissions, but it is not that I don't like them. It is that I think that they take what is an inherently partisan process, no matter how you dice it, and they just they can be a step in the right direction for sure. They can be better than what legislatures produce, but they take a lot of the deal making that is usually done by a legislative body out in the open, and then they just put it between three people behind closed doors, and you can't really see what's going on.
So it is a little bit like a pope. We get white smoke, and all of a sudden,
exactly.
we have new lines,
That's right. Yeah. Okay, so the thing I'm watching, this is very long term, and I have nothing particularly actionable here, but I had a really great conversation with Professor Don Green at Columbia while I'm up here in New York yesterday, and we were talking about this meta-analysis that he has done. A meta-analysis is, basically a study of a whole bunch of studies to determine whether or not they were methodologically sound. And what they were looking at, he and his co-authors were basically the effects of lots of various techniques of prejudice reduction. And so when you think of prejudice reduction, think, bias training that gets done mandated by HR departments and corporations and organizations. And basically what they found was the emperor has no clothes so far. They looked at some very large number of studies and the methodological quantitative analysis basically concluded that there's no evidence yet that any of these techniques show a quantifiable result in decreased prejudice. And so I think this is a really interesting thing to watch over the long term, especially as we see lots more sensitivity training imposed at corporations, and this dovetails with lots of conversations about critical race theory and school boards and all kind. It's a one big hairball of a conversation, but I think that piece of it is very, very interesting. And that doesn't mean it's not possible. It just means that the techniques that are being used are not methodologically sound. And that's we can link to that study in the show notes if any of you are interested in going down a very academic rabbit hole. But I thought that was interesting. Eric and Susan, before we go to the after party, aka Politicology Plus, where can people find you on the internet?
On Twitter at EricDKOCH.
And your new firm is?
It's called Downfield.
Congratulations, by the way. Susan?
I'm on Twitter, Del Percio S.
And you can find me on Twitter at Ron Steslow. Thank you to everyone at home and on the go for listening today. You can support the show by joining the growing, thriving community of Politicology Plus members and gain access to hours of special content designed to help you think like a political strategist and look further down the road than everyone else and understand the forces and figures shaping the fight for democracy. You can unlock this premium content at politicology.com/plus. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about, you can reach us, as always, at podcast@politicology.com. Even if we can't respond, we do read everything you send us, whether it's an episode idea, a guest recommendation, or just a simple note about how the show has impacted you. And we love hearing from you. I'm Ron Steslow. I'll see you in the next episode.